Today you're going to get to hang out with me as I geek out on one of my favorite topics, the information processing model. The information processing model is a theory developed by psychologists that allows us to understand how the brain takes in and processes information. It basically says that our brains take in information, we work with it in multiple ways, and we use it in different steps to learn that information. As we look at the information processing model, we're going to look at it or talk about it kind of as if it's a step-by-step process, but it's really important to note that the model is really, each of these are really not necessarily steps. They're things that are happening simultaneously or that could happen simultaneously, and if they don't, then we could end up forgetting that information or not learning it well enough. So it's not really like one step begets the next step. It's like all of these things are happening at the same time or require us to make choices or to be intentional in order to ensure that our learning is well facilitated. So we're going to begin with this idea of metacognition. How many of you have heard about metacognition? You might have heard that metacognition is thinking about your thinking, which seems very, meta. Ha ha ha. Yeah, so metacognition is being aware of our cognitive process, being aware of the things that are going on in your brain. And, but it's not super helpful if you're just like aware of it. You also need to do something to manage it. It's actually really interesting because research actually shows that only 49% of students at a college level actively employed metacognitive skills. 49% of people going to college. 53% of those students who were applying those metacognitive skills lacked clarity on which strategies would be most effective for their own learning. So of the students that were using metacognitive skills in a college setting, over half of those didn't know which strategies they should use. They just knew they should use strategies. They knew they weren't effectively learning and they were trying to figure out what strategies to use. Part of the disconnect here is in not properly understanding the different things that need to happen for our brains to actively and effectively learn information. So we're going to go through the information processing model today, and that way when we use our metacognitive skills while we're thinking about our thinking and working to ensure that we are learning in the best possible way, we're also connecting that with a deep understanding of the different things at play so that we can identify which one of those things is maybe needing to be tweaked so that we can learn more effectively. So we understand that element one of the information processing model, as it were, is metacognition. That is the awareness, and we're going to say and control of our thinking. And for the purpose of this class, we're going to say for the purpose of learning. Okay. So that's first part of it. Number two is environmental input. Environmental input is basically the idea and the awareness of the fact that there's so much happening in and around you. So it is all of the different things that could take our focus or our attention. That could include your professor speaking. It could include like the air conditioner being on and you being really cold. It could include you being hungry. It could be that you are distracted by that new person that you met on Hinge, okay? It could be that your phone just went off and now you're worried about whether or not your kids made it safely to school because they're starting to drive or something like that. So environmental input is the idea that there is all kinds of things happening in and around you, and also that these items have to hit your senses in order for them to impact you. So that includes like if your professor is speaking but you're asleep, like it's not hitting your senses, you're not actually going to learn that information by osmosis, believe it or not. So environmental input is simply that idea that the environment contributes to what we can learn and to what can distract us from learning. So just being aware of that. Sometimes the disconnect is not with how we're learning, but rather how we've set up our environment for success in learning. We're going to talk a lot about strategies a little bit later, but for now, let's keep going. All right, so the second part of this is, or the next part of this, which is officially number 3, is paying attention. I know it seems very simple, right? However, we are easily distracted, and attention takes energy. It takes purpose and intention. So we can't just sit in a room and stare off into space. And some of us have become very good at going to class and being quiet, and when we get distracted, being polite enough in class where we're not disruptive, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we've learned anything. Honestly, I zone out sometimes, and so I totally understand. It's hard for me to keep my attention. So paying attention is the art of intentionally focusing the mind. It is something that we have to actively do, and that we have to do over and over and over again, even in the course of one learning session, like one class. So that's number 3. Number 4, if we have stuff in the environment, right, and we pay attention to it, then it goes into what we call our working memory. Okay, our working memory is basically just I don't want to call it a space in your head, but it's where we hold things that we're actively thinking about and focusing on. So once we focus our attention, it goes into our working memory, and those are the things that we're actively holding in our mind while we work with them. The how we work with them, we're going to get to in a minute, but just understanding that when we pay attention to it, then it kind of goes into this bucket in our head, and that's for as long as we're paying attention to it. The second we stop paying attention to it, it just falls out of our head. Okay, so we have to continuously, intentionally hold it in our mind. We also have to understand that there are limitations to working memory. The average person can hold 5 to 7 items in their working memory at a time. It's important to note that those items can include things like thinking about the argument that you had with your partner this morning. It could include thinking about how hungry you are or how cold it is in the room. It could include, the information that your professor just gave you that you're very confused about and trying to work through that, plus the information that you're trying to work with actively. So that 5 to 7 items is actually really a small number. So sometimes the strategies that we need are related to expanding our working memory, or managing those other things so that they're not in our head, so that we can focus actively on what the information is we're trying to learn. Okay, let's continue. All right, number 5, again, this is not step by step. These are all happening simultaneously, and we have to make choices. We're going to call elaborate rehearsal. Elaborate rehearsal is the various strategies that we use to work with the information. Elaborate is that idea that it's variety and frequency, right? When we think about an elaborate pattern, we're looking at some really fun lace or something, and it's all kind of interconnected and all kind of interesting, right? So it's not simple, it's elaborate. The idea of this is that in order for information to go from our working memory into our long-term memory, for it to be officially really learned, we have to work with it in a variety of ways. So we're going to use a lot of different types of strategies to do that. And we're going to put it in our long-term memory and pull it out of our long-term memory and do it again and again and again and rinse and repeat. So elaborate rehearsal is there to remind you that it's not just one strategy. And actually, using the same strategy over and over again is not as effective as using that strategy and then using a different strategy and then using even a different strategy. These things are going to build different synapses in your brain and strengthen those in order to build a really strong connection between what you already know and what you're learning. And that is going to impact your ability to learn in a really magnificent way. So elaborate rehearsal reminds us that it's not just, okay, I put it in my working memory, I did one strategy, and now I'm good to go. It's the idea that we're going to do that strategy, and then we're going to test ourselves. And then we're going to do another strategy, and then we're going to do another strategy. We're going to use a lot of different strategies. We're going to really be elaborate in our learning process to allow our brain the best possible chance of absorbing that information in a long-term capacity. The types of strategies we use are really included in 6 and 7. 6, 7, okay. So the first one is encoding. So encoding is the process of moving things into our long-term memory. And this has to be done again multiple times. It's not like a one thing. This is part of elaborate rehearsal. So it's strategies that are designed to put things that are new into long-term memory. And then 7 is retrieval. And that's the process of taking things out of our long-term memory. It's also part of elaborate rehearsal. So arguably in elaborate rehearsal, we're encoding and we're retrieving. And that part over and over again, encoding and retrieving, is actually what elaborate rehearsal is. So encoding strategies are ones that are designed to take new information, put them into long-term memory. Retrieval strategies are strategies that are designed to see if that information has been remembered. And so they're designed to pull things out of long-term memory. So a retrieval strategy, it could be like a force recall, where it's like, okay, I'm going to look at the information, then I'm going to put my hand over it and I'm going to make my brain remember it. That's a type of retrieval strategy. So we use elaborate rehearsal, including encoding and retrieval strategies, over and over again until we put it into long-term memory and it comes back out. We retrieve it really easily. The last element then is long-term memory. This is where the information that we have actually learned is stored. Sometimes we think, I just need to learn that information long enough to take the test. The reality is that you can't learn things in a short-term capacity way. Like that's not realistic. We either learn them or we don't. Can you, for a very short amount of time, hold that in your working memory long enough to maybe jot down the answers to a question? Possibly. Is it going to be effective? Probably not. Are you going to get to those deeper levels of learning where you can actually apply the information and actually use it in different ways? Probably not. So putting it in our long-term memory is incredibly important. It's also important to note that all along the way, if we drop the ball, literally, on any of these things, like that information gets forgotten, or parts of it get forgotten, or it gets confusing or hard to retrieve. So along the way, we are looking for strategies to help us learn. When we find that we're having a hard time learning something, knowing this process will really allow you to figure out what's going wrong. It could be that the environment is just not set up and conducive to your learning. If you're hungry, if you're tired, if you're grumpy, if you just got in a fight with your spouse or your kid or your dog, all of those things affect our ability to learn. Also, if we have too many things in our mind, it could be about reducing the amount of things that you're holding on to so that you can focus more intentionally. It could also be that we're not using the right kind of strategies to encode or to retrieve, or we're trying to retrieve from our long-term memory, but we haven't encoded yet, and so it's not there to be retrieved. So instead of banging your head against the wall and being upset that you couldn't remember something, instead, let's go back through the process and figure out where it's broken, because if you follow the process and you practice the process and you do that elaborate rehearsal, it should work. So let's review the information processing model one more time. Again, remember, these things are elements. They're not done, one step after the other. They're kind of all being managed simultaneously and happening a lot of the times at the same time. But some of them do have an order. So there has to be something in the environment, right? So let's begin at the top. Metacognition is awareness and control of our thinking for the purpose of learning, at least for this class. Environmental input is the idea that there is something in the environment that could be learned or that could be distracting us, including things inside in our inner selves, in our inner environment. Attention is reminding you that you need to intentionally focus the mind. It doesn't happen by osmosis, guys. We need to actively pay attention. If we do that, then it's going to go into our working memory, which is where we're holding that information while we're actively working with it. Again, there's some limitations to that, 5 to 7. So sometimes we need to really just, clear all the distractions and focus some more. While it's in there in our working memory, we want to use various strategies so that we can work with that. So we're looking at an elaborate rehearsal style. So we're elaborately rehearsing with that information. We are using both encoding, which is where we move it into the long-term memory, and retrieval, which is where we're pulling it back out of the long-term memory strategies. So we want to use encoding strategies and retrieval strategies as part of that elaborate rehearsal process. And then, of course, if we do all of those things, then it will be in our long-term memory. And that is a space in our mind where we actually store the information that we have actually learned. Knowing this process is going to help you make adjustments to each part of the process. There are really, there are several different strategies for every part of the process, but focusing on environmental strategies and encoding and retrieval strategies are probably going to be the highest leverage items to help you really impact your day-to-day learning. So the first thing is looking around you and deciding, am I in an environment that is conducive to learning? So environmental strategies are the kind of strategies that can help us with arranging our environment, whether that's in our internal environment or whether that is our external environment, in a way to prepare us for learning. Sometimes it does mean that I need to take a step away and maybe calm down after the morning I had. Especially if something scary or tense or frustrating happened, taking a beat to acknowledge hey, I'm in a space that's going to make it harder for me to learn because I'm going to be carrying things into my working memory that are going to distract me. So there's that. But I would say focusing on encoding and retrieval strategies is also going to be really important for you. Encoding strategies, there's a lot of different ones, and it's important for you to have several different types of encoding and retrieval strategies, because that's what's going to really drive home and strengthen the information that you're learning. All right, so now that you know a little bit about the information processing model and how your brain works, it's now up to you. You no longer have an excuse. No matter what teacher you have, no matter how terrible they are, you can learn because you can look things up and you can apply the learning process to the information that you find. So the first step on how to really implement this is really learning the process. Learning how your brain works is going to help you so much in all of your academics. Research and use strategies for each part of the information processing model. Put this in the front of your binder, and when you find yourself getting stuck in class, pull one of those strategies out and be like, how can I do better at learning? And don't wait for your instructors to teach in a way that's easier for you. Instead, adjust the learning environment and use strategies to learn regardless of how your instructors teach. It's your future. Own it. And now you know how.